So now on to our dinosaur of the day, which is Confuciusornis, and that was a request from Elsornis via our Patreon and Discord, so thanks. Confuciusornis was an Avialan that lived in the Early Cretaceous in what is now China. It's been found in the Yixian and the Jiufotang Formations. It's from the Jehol Biota, which is an exciting biota because, well, we've talked about that one. A lot of the dinosaurs found there are just so well preserved.
A lot of feathery bird-like dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
And in huge numbers. Some of them we have hundreds of.
Yes. Including Confuciusornis. Which might be like 1,000 specimens found, something like that. Yeah. And it's a very much a bird-like dinosaur. I think it might be a bird.
Yeah, it depends on what you consider a bird.
Yeah, because Avialans are theropod dinosaurs that are more closely related to birds than Deinonychus, and they include birds. This one was very old. It lived about 125 to 120 million years ago, but it looked almost like a modern bird. It had wings, it had tail feathers, and a beak, claws on its hands and feet. It was about the size of a crow. It's estimated to be about 1.6 feet or 50 centimeters long, have a wingspan of up to over 2 feet or 70 centimeters, and weigh between, well, less than half a pound or about 0.2 kilograms, up to over 1 pound or half a kilogram.
Yep, sounds like a crow.
Mm-hmm. Many skulls have been found, but they were crushed. We do know it had a deep jaw and a robust skull, though, as well as a robust, pointed, toothless beak.
Oh, I was going to ask if it had teeth. For some reason, I always think Confuciusornis had teeth.
I do too, but just because it lived that long ago doesn't mean it had teeth.
Yeah.
Some specimens had 8 neck bones, others had 9. It had a short tail with a pygostyle, that's the fused tail bones.
That gives you a little tail fan in most cases.
Yeah, but it also had these 2 long, streaming tail feathers.
Oh, yeah.
It had a large upper arm bone, or humerus, large claws on its arms, or hands. The claw on its first finger was large and curved. These claws were probably for climbing. It also had curved foot claws and foot pads and scales on the bottom of its feet, which may mean that it perched in trees like modern birds that have similar features. So, based on the features of its feet, maybe it spent a lot of time in trees.
Yeah, and you said that its claws would have been good for climbing too, which seems like another clue.
Yes.
I remember you talking in an episode a while back about how animals with more curved claws are more for climbing and ones that have more straight claws are more for running.
Yeah.
So this sounds like a climber, not a runner.
Well, there's a lot of debate over how it climbed or flew, or if it did. I'll get into that.
Okay.
Hundreds of specimens at least have been found, maybe up to 1,000. Many of them have feathers. And it had these long, modern-looking wing feathers, as well as a relatively round, broad wing. Even though it had feathers, there's no signs of quill knobs on the arms, though. And, like I mentioned, there's just a lot of debate over how or if Confuciusornis flew.
Yeah, because usually, or pretty much every bird that I know of now, has the feathers that attach directly to the bone in their arms. The flight feathers do, so that they have that nice rigid connection. So when they're flapping their wings really hard, the feathers aren't bouncing all over the place and they're giving them good, powerful flight stroke without a lot of extra movement that steals the energy away.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't have quill knobs, I mean, even Velociraptor probably had quill knobs. Some of the relatives do. So it's weird that Confuciusornis doesn't have quill knobs. But it's so bird-like.
I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
But one study found the shoulder joint was oriented sideways instead of upward like modern birds. And that means it wouldn't have been able to lift its wings high above its back, or maybe not even lift it above like a horizontal position. And if that's the case, that would mean Confuciusornis couldn't flap to fly.
Oh, man. The view I had of Confuciusornis is being shattered.
Well, again, lots of debate here because another study said it could probably fly based on having long wings with asymmetrical feathers, a fused wrist, a short tail, strong arms, and some other features. But because it was unable to rotate its arm behind its body, it probably just couldn't fly for long periods of time.
Unless it was super weird, like a hummingbird, where they flap like, with, sort of parallel to their body rather than perpendicular to their body.
Yeah.
That would be a sight to see.
There's some scientists, though, that think it could flap to fly, but was better at soaring. Others said it glided and used its wings for parachuting to help slow it down if it fell or jumped from a tree.
That seems like the simplest explanation.
Could be. There's a study from 2016 that used laser fluorescence to look at soft tissues in 2 specimens, and they found that Confuciusornis had a wing shape similar to gliding birds or birds that lived in forests and would need to maneuver more than they needed to be fast. And they also found the propatagium, which is at the edge of the wing and contains a muscle that connects the shoulder and wrist to help it fly. It would have helped it lift. So that shows that Confuciusornis could fly, but maybe only for short periods of time.
And that propatagium is considered really important for being able to fly because that leading edge of the wing is where a lot of the lift comes from.
Yes. Oh, and just real quick, laser stimulated fluorescence, also known as LSF, it's an imaging technique, and you shine a laser on something and you can see the soft tissues and fossils glow in the dark, and you see a lot of other details.
They fluoresce.
They fluoresce, yes. So another LSF study of more than 1,000 fossils of multiple types of flying feathered dinosaurs that were found in China examined their shoulder and chest areas, and they found that shoulder muscles were important for wing upstrokes and chest muscles were important for wing downstrokes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Confuciusornis had strong shoulders but a weak chest, so it seems that it did upstrokes. And also, Confuciusornis had no feathers on the first digit of its hand. Maybe it had a separate winglet below the main wing on the third fingers, which would be like a flap. Some scientists have argued that the rachis of the feathers, that's the upper part of the feather shaft where the barbs are attached.
What's sort of the middle, the stiff middle part that you use as a quill?
Yeah. They argued that it was too thin or weak for flapping flight, but not everybody agrees with this. There's not that many specimens that have clear impressions of the rachis, and that makes it hard to determine if they were thick enough.
Yeah, because without the rachis, you've basically got more of like a downy, fluffy feather, and you can't fly with that.
But on the other hand, Confuciusornis had a well-developed sternum or breastbone and shoulder muscles, and there's also details in the arms and the shape of the wing feathers that show it could fly. The latest study, at least that I found, was from 2023. They examined a well-preserved specimen with a lot of details preserved of its feathers, and they found that Confuciusornis could glide better than modern landfowl that can fly short-term. So they suggested Confuciusornis could fly for long periods of time, actually, by switching between flapping and gliding.
That's interesting. Sort of like a wind sprint situation.
Yeah.
I feel like I should mention, too, we're making it sound like no animals can fly if they don't have the right kind of feathers, but bats don't have feathers. Pterosaurs didn't have advanced asymmetrical feathers. If it had the skin in the right places and it was strong enough, it may not have needed feathers or a firm attachment of feathers to things.
True. Confuciusornis had a lot of feathers, including tail feathers. Like I said before, they had these 2 long, narrow tail feathers that ended in rounded tips, and they've been described as streamer-like. What's interesting is there's actually a lot of individuals that didn't have these 2 tail feathers. So the thinking is, well, maybe it's sexual dimorphism.
Yeah, like that bird, the quetzal, which has 2 really long feathers that are very showy, but I don't think the females have that at all.
Yes, but there's a lot of debate over if there is sexual dimorphism. What we do know is there's specimens found that don't have these 2 tail feathers, but they're well preserved with feathers on the rest of the body, so it doesn't seem like they're missing them because of poor preservation.
So, of course, then you could just get to the question of maybe it's just another species.
No, that doesn't seem to be the case. There's one 2011 study that found that out of 130 specimens, 18% had the long tail feathers, 28% did not, and the rest were just too poorly preserved to know. If it is sexual dimorphism, maybe they were used for mating or courtship displays. But not everyone thinks it is sexual dimorphism, because that's often a hotly debated topic. And in modern birds with similar feathers, both males and females have the tail feathers.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, maybe the quetzal, the female, get them sometimes? I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know modern birds that well.
Or they're not similar enough. Maybe there's a different bird that's more similar.
There's a 2013 study that found medullary bone in one specimen with a short tail, and they didn't find it in 3 specimens that had the long tail. So they were suggesting the short tail ones were females and the ones with the long tails were males. So back to the sexual dimorphism. And in that case, the female specimen was already done growing quickly, and it was smaller than the largest Confuciusornis specimens. It had at least 2 lags, so it was at least 2 to 3 years old, and that shows that it grew over several years. But a 2018 study questioned this medullary bone finding, saying it was only found on the arm, while in modern birds you see it mostly in the legs, and the tissue that's preserved is in small fragments. So there's a lot of debate on why some Confuciusornis have the two tail feathers and why some don't. And there's also why are they different body sizes? Because there's some large ones, I think, that have tail feathers, some smaller ones have them.
Oh, interesting.
It's hard to know. It could be that some of the individuals died while they were molting.
Yeah. I was thinking too, if your ratio is 18% to 28% with and without, you've also got ones that would be too young. If it is a sexual dimorphism display structure that you grow later in life when you're ready to find a mate, you wouldn't expect the young males to have it either. So you would expect less than half of them to have it. And then especially if you throw in things like, is it mating season and have they molted recently?
Right. I don't know for that study if they looked at the ages of the specimens, though.
Yeah.
Not sure how that broke down. There is one study that found that Confuciusornis did molt. And with modern birds like songbirds, molting helps with flight because you get rid of those old and damaged feathers. And in that study, they looked at more than 500 specimens. They found that 2 died mid-molt. You can see new feathers growing in between the gaps left from the mature feathers on the slab. And in one specimen, the gaps were the same on both wings, so that showed this pattern of sequential molting, where it's molting in order. And many songbirds do that too. So that could be the oldest evidence of molting.
I think might have seen a Archaeopteryx molt since then.
Good point. Because when I read that, I thought there was something older, but I couldn't remember what it was.
It was the oldest at the time when they found it, but now we have Archaeopteryx molting too.
Yes.
Another couple dozen million years later or earlier.
Yes. We somewhat know the colors of Confuciusornis. Some earlier studies found it either had some gray or red-brown and black, somewhat like a zebrafinch, or perhaps it had a dark body and wings that were white, with the long tail also being dark. But then there's a 2018 study that showed one specimen had heavy spotting on its wings, throat, and crest, so there's some debate there. In 2008, there was a study of 106 specimens that found Confuciusornis all grew to be a similar size. In those 106 specimens, though, some were smaller, some were larger. They found the smaller ones were juveniles, the larger ones were adults, and the very few medium-sized ones were possibly individuals that were on a growth spurt just before they became adults.
Interesting.
Yeah. Or it could be maybe Confuciusornis had some different sizes because there's multiple species, or something killed them that affected the youngest and oldest individuals the most. So a little bit of speculation there.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to sexual dimorphism, there's also another study that found differences in size were because some were male, some were female. There was one study that found that Confuciusornis grew fast based on histological samples, and it probably reached adult size in less than 20 weeks, maybe even as few as 8 to 13 weeks.
Wow.
Yes, which they said the estimated growth rate is still slower than many modern birds, which can be full grown in 6 to 8 weeks.
Yep. Some of them are pretty precocial.
Yeah.
Since that's where the word comes from. Basically almost born as adults with a lot of abilities.
But then a 2019 study sliced into 33 long bones, the arms and legs, of Confuciusornis, and they found it grew quickly at first until it reached almost, being full grown. Then it would slow down for 3 to 4 years before reaching its skeletal maturity.
Weird. But I guess maybe there's a survival bias, right? Sort of like we talk about with sauropods, where it's like, get big as fast as you possibly can so things won't try to eat you anymore.
Yeah.
Could be something similar going on with Confuciusornis, where there's some pressure to get really big or get to a certain size as fast as possible. And then after that, the pressure might die down a little bit.
Yeah. There's a lot of debate over what and how Confuciusornis ate. It's one of the first birds to evolve a beak. And at first, the hypothesis was it was an herbivore. There's no evidence, though, of gastroliths to help it digest plants. Another study suggested it swam to catch prey like fish. There was another that suggested it foraged while flying, called sally striking. It's a new term I learned, where you got prey from the water or the ground while flying. Its long wings would have been good for soaring there. And then it has a long thigh bone and a short foot that's similar to kingfishers. In 2003, some scientists suggested that having the robust toothless jaws meant that it ate seeds, even though there's no evidence for that. In 2006, there was one specimen described with fish bones found near the neck vertebrae, and the fish seemed like they were about to be regurgitated as a pellet or stored in the crop, so maybe Confuciusornis was omnivorous like crows. There was a study Going back to LSF, another LSF study that looked at the beak and jaws of Confuciusornis, and they found that it had a rampotheca. That's keratin that covers the beak. And the rampotheca was detached from the bony part of the beak, which means it was easily detachable. So they tested the jaw strength and found Confuciusornis probably ate soft foods.
I mean, I guess it's easy-ish detachable, but you don't know after it died how easy it was for it to come off, really.
Yeah. Interestingly, only 5 specimens have been found with the keratin on the beak, which is surprising because there's hundreds of them. And that shows the differences in the species. You were talking about different species. There are different species of Confuciusornis. I just don't know how that plays into the sexual dimorphism debate.
Mm-hmm.
One species, Confuciusornis duai, has a more upward curving beak that tapers toward the tip, and then there's another one, Confuciusornis sanctus, that had a tip that's slightly hooked downward, just as some examples. So like I mentioned, more than 1,000 Confuciusornis specimens have been found, but a lot of them were smuggled out of China, and there's a lot that are held privately and not available for research, which is why in a lot of these studies they mention like something like 500 specimens. The type species is Confuciusornis sanctus, and there are 5 species. We've got Sanctus, Duai, Fiduciae, Jiangchengensis, and Shifan. In November of 1993, paleontologists Lianhai Ho and Yaoming Hu visited fossil collector Zhang He to see a fossil that he'd bought at a local flea market. And then in December of that year, Ho learned about a second specimen that a farmer, Yang Yushan, had found. Then in 1995, Ho and others described and named Confuciusornis sanctus based on, it ended up being 3 specimens. The genus name refers to the philosopher Confucius and the Greek word for bird, and the species name means holy one in Latin. It's a translation of the Chinese word shengxian, which means sage and refers to Confucius. The holotype's a partial skeleton with the skull and parts of the arms, and the other 2 skeletons contain bones that weren't found with the holotype, so for a while it was unclear if they were actually Confuciusornis, but later there were a lot more well-preserved skeletons found, so they showed that they were all the same species, because they were able to compare. A lot of local farmers dug for fossils, and they found a lot of specimens. These fossils were buried from flooding and volcanic debris, which meant that they were really well preserved, and that includes soft tissues like feather impressions. The fossils are flat and they're almost 2-dimensional.
Yeah, it's a lot like Archaeopteryx that way, where they're sort of smashed, but you get the good feather impressions and a lot of details that you don't normally get with fossilization. But since they're smashed flat, you're missing a lot of the details you do get with other fossils, like the 3D structure of the skull, especially, is missing.
Mm-hmm. And Confuciusornis specimens are often found in large groups in lake bottom sediments. They appear to not have moved far from where they died, so it seems like they traveled in flocks together over lake surfaces, like other flying animals, just going back to the flying debate.
I guess crows travel in groups too, but that reminds me more of a duck flying over lakes.
There is one discovery that found 40 individuals together, and that could mean an entire flock was killed at the same time, maybe by ash or heat or poisonous gas after volcanic eruptions.
And if they couldn't actually do powered flight, do they count as a flock? I don't know.
Well, the latest study was flapping and gliding, so...
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe a flock.
Many species over the years of Confuciusornis have been named and described, but not all of them are considered valid. And the species name refers to Chuanzhou, which is an ancient name for Beipiao, but now that one's considered to be a synonym of Confuciusornis sanctus. Ho also named Confuciusornis sunniae in 1997, and that species name is in honor of Madame Sun, the wife of Shiquan Liango, who donated the fossils to the Institute of Vertebrate Paleontology and Paleoanthropology. But now it's considered to be a synonym also of Confuciusornis sanctus.
Been a lot of lumping happening.
Yes. Ho and others named Confuciusornis duai in 1999. That species name is in honor of the fossil collector who donated the bones, Wang Yadu. 2 specimens were found, and this species was considered to be different because it's smaller. The jaw tips were more pointed. The lower jawbone didn't have a keel under it, and there were differences in the body, like the claw on the first digit being smaller, the sternum's longer, and the lower part of the leg was shorter than the pygostyle of the tail. But a study in 2011 found Confuciusornis duai to be the same as Confuciusornis sanctus. However, the holotype of Confuciusornis dui was probably lost, so that study used a cast, and we just might need another study to determine if the species is valid.
That's a bummer that they lost the holotype. It wasn't found that long ago.
Yeah.
I'm not used to holotypes being lost that were found in the late 1900s. I'm used to that being things from the 1800s or maybe 80 years ago.
Yeah, well, things happen. In 2009, Fu Chengzhang and others named Confuciusornis fiducii. That species name is in honor of the ornithologist Alan Fiducia. It's considered to be bigger than other species of Confuciusornis and have different proportions, and there's other differences like the arm's 15% longer than the leg, versus the arm and leg length are the same in Confuciusornis sanctus. But then a 2011 study also found Confuciusornis fiducii to be the same as Confuciusornis sanctus.
So much lumping.
In 2010, Lili and others named Confuciusornis jianchangensis, which was found in a different formation from the other species. It was found in Jiufotang instead of Yixian. So that one stuck around. As has the one named in 2022, the new species Confuciusornis jiufotang, which was named based on a nearly complete skeleton. It lived in the Early Cretaceous about 119 million years ago, and it was smaller than the other species. It weighed less than 200 grams or 7 ounces.
Ooh, that is a lot smaller.
Yeah. It's preserved on a slab. It looks also like a stronger flyer based on the wings, and it had this extra cushion-like bone in the first digit of the wing. The species name Shifa means a paragon of all teachers in Mandarin, and that's in honor of Confucius, and it also commemorates the 70th anniversary of Shenyang Normal University, also known as Shenyang Shifan Dashui. In 2007, Gary Kaiser mentioned a skeleton of Confuciusornis with an egg near its right foot, but we don't actually know for sure if the two were related. The egg was the right width to fit through the pelvic canal. There's a connection in the lower bones of Confuciusornis that restricts the width of it.
Just like in humans.
Yes.
You can only push out something so big.
That's true.
That seems like pretty good evidence, although there were a lot of other small bird-like dinosaurs in that area, so there certainly would have been a lot of eggs around that size. And if it was pulling an oviraptor, at least what we first thought oviraptor was doing, maybe it was just trying to eat that egg or something.
Oh no, you're giving it a reputation.
The simplest explanation is probably that it was its egg, though.
Well, Kaiser also suggested that Confuciusornis had nests in crevices in trees to protect them, and the small size of the egg may mean that there were large clutch sizes. But a study in 2016 found that Mesozoic birds probably buried their eggs in the ground, like some non-avian dinosaurs.
Yeah, we've seen more recent studies where they talked about the porosity of the eggs can determine whether they were buried or if they were sat on, brooded, or if they were, I guess, left out in the air, like you would have there if it was jammed into a crevice. I don't think they applied it to Confuciusornis in that study, though.
I'm not sure. Confuciusornis lived in a cool, temperate climate, in an area with lakes, forests, and volcanoes. Other dinosaurs that lived around the same time and place include the compsognathid Sinocalliopteryx, which one of those has been found with a Confuciusornis in its guts, the Oviraptorosaur Catopteryx, the feathered tyrannosauroid Eutyrannus, and birds.
So many birds.
So many birds. And other animals that lived around the same time and place included gastropods, bivalves, insects, fish, mammals, lizards, and pterosaurs.
Yeah, Confuciusornis is a super important dinosaur.
Any dinosaur where you found so many specimens
is
very important. Yeah, it can tell you a lot.
Hundreds to 1,000. Yeah, because you get some actual sample size there. That's very helpful.
Although, like we saw, there's still debates over how it flew and sexual dimorphism.
Yeah, still need more fossils.
Yes.
Even though there's like 1,000 of them. In this case, it might be need more study than need more fossils, actually.
Yeah, it could be.